today we're going to talk to some really great leaders. First, we have Jeannie Kim, who is the VP of Brand and Content at Fora Travel. Then we have Jon Kowieski, who is the Growth Marketing Consultant previously at Brex. And then we also have Erin Bruehl, VP of Comms at Current. Before we get started, I gave your titles, but let's talk about who you are and your experience. We'll start with you, Jon.
Right now, I'm a growth marketing consultant for Harvey AI, Vanta, Lumos, and I work with Jump AI. Previously, I was at Brex and in charge of growing geo and SEO. So really deep background into that.
Awesome. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jeannie. I'm currently the VP of Brand and Content at Fora. I started my career in magazine journalism, so I'm aging myself a little bit, print magazine journalism, and then transitioned into digital, and from there, made the leap into tech. So I've worked for a number of different tech companies running content, so The Muse, Policy Genius, and now Fora, and being really responsible for everything that content means at those brands, whether it was for brand building, whether it was for lead acquisition, however they defined content.
Great. And I'm Erin Bruehl. I'm VP of Communications at Current. Current's a consumer fintech based here in New York, so we're all mobile banking, mostly for people who live paycheck to paycheck. I've been there 7 years now. I was employee 32, so I've literally done everything content to comms possible. But similar to Jeannie, I started my career in print journalism. I was a newspaper reporter. I was a sports writer here in New York for several years. Then I was the head writer at US Open Tennis, kind of very early to the internal, comms game. And then I've kind of transitioned to being the head of social media there. And I was head of social media and brand promotions at Priceline. And then Current found me by a cold email on LinkedIn about 7 years ago last month. So You never know.
It's a journey. Okay, so let's get into it. We're not going to go around the bush. You've all had to pitch why do content at a brand to the C-suite. What did that entail? Because we're all dying to know. So Jon, you're going to go first on this one.
Yeah, traditionally it's how can we 2x marketing pipeline for me?
Okay.
So then it goes down to how many SQLs we need, how many MQLs, how many leads, how much organic traffic, and how much geo traffic and visibility do we need? And then kind of do a breakdown of the projects that we would need to do for the year, quarter, and then break down budgets that we'd need. So one of the more interesting things that I always like to have is an experimentation budget that's maybe 5 to 10%, okay. Because with how fast things are changing, you might need to do something new that you just didn't budget for.
That is true. Jeannie?
Yeah, I would say those are all that's incredible, granular information. I would say pulling back a level. One thing to remember is that this is never just one conversation, right? You're never going to go and be like, we should do content. Here's why. Done. Right? You're always going to be, and for better and for worse, right? The good news is you get to have that conversation over and over and over again to continue to, you have multiple at-bats to prove the value and the worth of content. The downside of that is that you have to have that conversation over and over again. I think as Tracy alluded to in an earlier panel, what you really have to do is focus on what does the person that you're talking to actually care about? Yeah. Where did they see the actual value of content? And again, as Tracy said, if this is somebody who does not care at all about brand, you cannot talk to them about brand. You have to talk to them in terms of acquisition, or it's usually a dollar value that is being produced by content, and you may have to do some funny math to get there. But quite often, when people are talking about ROI in the C-suite, it is about what are the dollars that I'm putting in? I mean, that's literally the definition of ROI, return on investment, right? What are the dollars I'm putting into content, and what are the dollars I'm going to get back from it? Whether that is explicitly straight line or a wandering waving line.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I would say I've been fairly lucky in the early stage of my career then when I went to the US Open, USTA. I was in-house writer there, system managing editor of the website. We had teams of freelance writers, and content was a huge part of what the organization did. From a national level, the content filtered down to, familiar with the USA, the sections across the country. And we actually wanted to be competitive with content. We wanted people to read tennis news and US Open news on our site, not on ESPN, not on Sports Illustrated. We wanted to, get that match story up first, get those highlights up first and get people for us to have the best content. So I was very, very fortunate in that regard. And then, I kind of, again, to date myself here, when I started there, social media wasn't really a thing yet. In fact, I actually created the US Open Instagram account on like the fly in an event one night. We decided, hey, it's a good idea. But so when I was there, we kind of slowly saw that this was a channel that more and more people were engaging with us. Like there was literally 3 people assigned who could like tweet. There wasn't a strategy. It was like, oh, we got some news. Let's just put it on there. And then we started to realize more and more people were there and that we could be taking content to meet people where they are. Well, how are they engaging with content on, we used to like start every day of the US Open with a Vine of players practicing. Now it's coming back, right? Well, everything is back.
It is.
So we started to, everyone could see this was a viable channel to engage more people. And kind of coincidentally, then when I went to Priceline, like as a for-profit company, the motto there was, in God we trust, everyone else must bring data, to go back to what Kelly and Ara were talking about. Yeah. And there wasn't a content program as such back then, but quickly found a way, like we're creating social content that, how do we get attention and how do we create content? I could partner with the sponsorship team. What if we could find a way for like our partners, like we only have so many things we can sell on the website and promotions, but all of a sudden social and content became a way to generate more revenue because we could offer them more things, such as, sponsor a quiz on our Facebook page or such like that. And coming to Current, I was in charge of all the content comms and, as a consumer facing business, which I think is very different if you're a B2B business, content is actually part of the comms program. Shout out to Stacker. They didn't ask me to promote them, but actually we're a Stacker client, and I kind of met them at just the right time because I was tasked with standing up a consumer comms program. And I'm a team of 1. I don't have the kind of data that Kelly and I don't have a dedicated data analyst, but content became the consumer comms program such that, we can write a story, we can distribute it then, through the newswire service as provided. So I feel like I've been very fortunate in that regard. And it's kind of interesting, I think, how we've kind of gone back to the things that we did, like, just a few years ago.
Yeah, just a few years. Let's not take it farther than that. Okay, so I want to dig into something really quick and take a step back. So, Jon, you've been in growth marketing and you've worked at Brex, which is a startup. And then you were talking about, you both, Jeannie and Erin, have this journalism background. So there's definitely an inherent difference in how you approach this. Can you talk a little bit more? I'll start with you, Jeannie, from the journalism perspective, like how do you approach it differently, or what have you had to learn along the way in like making the case for content?
Yeah, well, as some earlier panelists alluded to, I literally had to learn like the language of business and marketing because, in my journalism days, all we cared about was page views and clicks and things like that. Maybe, page views and then clicks from social. We didn't even care what people did once they got on the website that much. So I really had to learn about like conversions and lifetime value and things like that. Once I did, though, honestly, I loved it. And I was talking to some fellow ex-journalists at the break about this. I often say I will never go work in ad-supported media again. And one of the reasons is by the end of my time working in ad-supported media, it started to feel really dishonest. Not dishonest, that's a little too strong. But it started to feel like my real job was not creating great content for people to consume. My real job was selling eyeballs to advertisers. And I see people know what I'm talking about.
I get it.
And it became really like, maybe like my people don't want to read about ankylosing spondylitis just because there's a new drug, right? Like, and so the moving into the tech world where there was like a very clear ROI on like the business things that my content was supposed to drive, it felt so much clearer and more honest because it was like, okay, my company is selling a thing. There are people who want to buy that thing. And the content that I produce is going to help them in their understanding of whether to buy my company's thing, whether to buy some other thing, whether they need this thing at all.
Yeah.
And that felt to me like it was genuinely providing like a real service, right? Now, obviously, I think people who are like journalists, right? Like not a lifestyle journalism was like a totally different thing, but they made, I think if you're like a reporter for the Wall Street Journal, you probably feel a little bit differently about it. But I think that transition was surprisingly not that difficult for me.
Good to know. Jon?
Yeah, the way I think about content is clearly leads.
Yeah.
Granted, I always think about influence and engagement. If you can do those both really well, it leads to leads and it leads to customers. So brand work, for example, lots of influence, and it actually helps with geo for brand authority. So SEO content, it helps bring in leads and the right traffic if you're targeting and creating the right articles. And SEO, like essentially I just want to bring as many qualified users as I can. And what I mean is I don't want to just bring in spam traffic. I want to bring in my ICP. So hopefully I'm creating content that leads to that, because in reality, that's what will actually help me bring in more SQLs and pipeline at the end of the day.
Well, and I think that's like that is an adjustment, I think, coming from, again, sort of the lifestyle journalism where you're like, we just need something viral, right? You want to get lots of traffic. You want to get some viral things. And being viral, like in a lead generating environment, is not necessarily beneficial, because you're just like throwing more trash into the top of the funnel. It's not, these are not people who are going to be your customers. Now there's a time and a place for being viral, but like, that's not like your goal.
Yeah. And I've 5x'd organic traffic before at ThoughtSpot. It didn't necessarily bring in the best traffic, so I learned a lot. So when I came to Brex, I focused on bringing in the right traffic, which helped me hit certain goals very quickly.
I want you to dig into that a little bit deeper, Jon. So like you help bring in the right traffic. And we've been talking a lot about like, hey, company loved having content, or like they weren't sure yet. How does someone in their audience take like, okay, I know you want to invest in content, you're bought into it, but I have a strategy. How do they take that? And so it's not just sitting on a shelf somewhere. Like how do they actually execute it?
Yeah. I mean, you need to create a timeline. And you need to create urgency around it. You have to move quick nowadays, otherwise your competitors will move quicker and gain an edge. So I would focus on what's going to drive overall value for your audience. And when you talk about the marketing funnel, it doesn't always have to bring in leads initially. And in reality, when you break down touch points, most of the time, the first touch point for your attribution can be content, but they end up completing the conversion on an ad or something like that.
Yeah.
So you have to really understand what's doing that. So break down that attribution to understand what you need to create more of. So I always like to analyze how I can create better content too. The biggest thing nowadays is everyone's creating the same content, and Google has brought it up numerous times. So how can you be different if you're targeting the same keyword? Could you use some of those brand insights in your content to make you stand out, because competitors can't actually copy that? Can you bring up case studies and things like that? So I think that needs to be in the strategy as well.
And if I can just build on this idea of bringing in the right traffic, I mean, I think one of the things that I've seen in, my current company and then the previous two companies that I've worked at, like, as we all know, search traffic has just continued to decline over the last few years, and really catastrophically in the last year. But every place I've worked, if you have the right content strategy, what you'll see, and I've seen this again at multiple companies now, you can have less traffic but be generating more revenue from that traffic. And so it's really important to understand as a content leader, not just how much traffic are you getting, but what does the conversion look like? What does the actual value look like? And really even understanding, like, we used to have at Policy Genius, like a dashboard that was like value per session of every piece of content that we generated, because we could see like all through the pipeline, like how much revenue was coming in from different leads. And so we could see like, oh, okay, like if we increase traffic by 10% on this page, it's going to generate 10x more revenue than increasing traffic by 10% on this other page. So drilling down and like really understanding your data and your performance is really critical for that ROI piece.
I would even say too that, coming from someone who's more of a pure content person, that the ROI of your content doesn't always have to be revenue. In a lot of cases, it's not. And I'll use an example that, obviously like a current, like as a consumer focused business, we have a robust acquisition budget program, such like that. We offer products like fee-free overdraft and wage access and high yield savings, which are directly targeting people searching for these terms. But when it comes to content, when we started, my CEO, our head of marketing, and I started talking about what does a consumer communications program look like, we were talking about, again, a point Jeannie made before too, is like reaching people where they are and like what they're already looking for, that I think like we've all mentioned. But we knew we believed in it, but we're like, how do we know if we produce these stories, we produce this content, it's not being asked to generate revenue for the business. Like it's not going to do that. We have an acquisition performance marketing channels that do that. But how do we know people are reading it?
Yes, the $1 million.
Like that there are eyes on it, that it's point about, that Jon made about like, and like also about like the search traffic going down, but it's just kind of unrealistic to think that like website clicks is going to be a metric. And I think that's where we, like the GEO part of this came in, because we're like, well, if we're producing these like thousands of stories a month, like what if we started looking at citations? So I started tracking all of the stories, like, kind of reverse engineering them. I had this story. I asked Claude what prompts would lead to this story being cited. And I kind of put those prompts into, my tracker. And sure enough, now I kind of hacked together like a report every month that I can show, like, my CEO is like, well, our blog from December on financial resolutions had 500 citations last month. As opposed to like, especially in comms, we're like, we reported on these BS stats for years of impressions. Like, what does that mean? Like, that's how many people visit the New York Times in like a day, not how many people, you don't know if anyone actually read your story, right? But the citations, like, I feel like the GEO like moment, or AO, whichever you refer to it as, kind of gave people like me like this real metric for the first time of, okay, somebody was served that answer by Claude, by ChatGPT, and your brand came up. An article to your website came up, and the odds they saw it pretty high. And now we have like an actual metric that we didn't really have before.
Thank you so much. I want to dig into more stuff, obviously, but let's talk about the metrics. And you in particular, Erin, you talk about the dashboard, like Jeannie touched on it. What metrics do you input, or like data do you put into that dashboard so that you can get these metrics? Like, can you go a little more granular for everyone here?
Like, well, I'd say like for me, like, Jeannie's probably, and Jon probably have much more robust ones that I have, but honestly, like, we're tracking like all of the visibility rate, the citation rate, kind of like all of these stories, and kind of trying to make guesses then about, well, why did this story get so many pickups? Like, we had did a data study around affordability earlier this year that's just been crushing it in terms of citation for months. But for example, then all the stories are, somehow financial related to products that Current would offer. But we realized for some other topics, like we had one about like, how to survive like wedding season on a budget, that the GEO, like that one's not performing well. And so it's kind of looking at like what's zero, what's really high. Like, wow, like the platforms don't see us as an authority. Like that's more of a lifestyle topic, and they do not see us as an authority on that. So that's, okay, those are some signals that if that's the direction we want to go in, is like reaching people in lifestyle, we have a lot of work to do in terms of content and building that up. Versus topics like financial resolutions, how to save money, they see us as a large authority on already. So it's kind of giving us a lot of triggers then of where we need to do work and where we're already strong.
Got it. Jeannie, do you have anything to add on the dashboard?
Yeah, I would say in terms of like building out dashboards, like I was saying earlier, like thinking about like what are the metrics that matter most to the business and how can you tie those metrics back. I think the other thing is too, like you're going to have, I wish for you all that there's like some revenue tied to your content. But I think when you're thinking about things like, AI visibility or brand, is thinking about like, okay, like how are you going to measure those things, and how are you going to like be like, how can you defend it, right? So maybe it's having like an AI visibility tracking, and you create a report every month. Or maybe it's a brand tracking survey that you run monthly or quarterly or, ongoing or something like that. But really thinking about like, what are you what's the thing that you're trying to drive through this content, and then finding a clear way to measure it that is defensible, that you can, I think as somebody said earlier, like that you could sit down and put in front of your head of finance and feel comfortable about.
Yeah, for me, clearly, the SQLs, the MQLs, the leads, and where they're coming from.
You're going to have to explain those terms.
Yeah. But also thinking about what's influencing the pages that's bringing in those leads. So a lot of people don't actually think about that, but they should. There's things like topical authority that I think about a lot. So if you're writing off on a topic, that traditionally you're going to show up higher for that topic in SEO. So organic traffic, and I break it down by branded, non-branded. At the end of the day, a lot of brands have much different strategies for branded, which I'll just tell you, a lot of things for geo work for branded. And then non-branded, and that's traditionally where you're going to bring in new influence, more leads, and things like that. So I break that down and try to figure it out for geo reasons. I'm trying to figure out essentially from my money keywords from SEO, what's actually bringing in the leads, what are the most likely prompts that will bring in leads and traffic, and what is being pinged the most by these crawlers essentially. So if I can essentially get that page a little bit higher in the citation, could it bring in more traffic and more leads? So I do try to figure all of that out as well, but really it comes down to like attribution and what we can measure. So, which is going to be much more difficult in the future.
I do think that branded versus non-branded distinction is super important, because, you know, the non-branded search is telling you like what people are searching for, literally like to find you for the first time. But branded search is people who have learned about you through other ways. So whether it's GEO, whether it's an ad, whether it's, you know, more sort of brand oriented content, if you can see that branded search growing, that can also tell you a lot about how all of your other initiatives are doing.
Yeah, and I've seen a podcast increase brand traffic for 2 weeks. And when you can make that correlation, it tells you I should keep investing in that podcast, or maybe I should make some content that's kind of related to that podcast because the viewers find it interesting. So there's things like that you have to figure out too with branded.
That's good. I want to go back to, you said we've been talking about content and then we're talking about reporting, but how can brands, like, how can they structure it on their website? So we were talking about this earlier, John, of like, we have a blog sometimes, and in content and comms, we have newsrooms, and just trying to get brands to understand like, hey, that's not always the best approach. Like, what would you recommend?
Yeah, I tend to make content hubs for technical SEO reasons. The URL structure matters quite a bit. I think more people are catching on to this, to be honest. It's for topical authority reasons as well. And when a user gets to that content hub and they just want to learn about one topic, they can easily go and see everything on that topic. So it's actually better for crawling reasons too. So clearly for geo reasons, it's being done. And then I basically put insights, product related content into like the blog, or if you have enough insights content, you just put that into a different section of the website. So I think isolating it is much better for the user, which in theory is much better for SEO and geo.
That's great. Anything to add there from the content comp set?
Yeah, I mean, like I own our blog too, and also obviously then our press page, which are separated out. And I think John's kind of spot on about kind of different pages of content for different purposes, right? Like the blog is for consumers, the newsroom is for investors, partners. They don't need to sift through like how to set financial resolutions, kind of information, but those are people specifically looking for information about current or a conversation about branded terms. And they just quickly want to know what's current history, how much money have they raised, who do they partner with, how do they make money, what's their business model, and kind of putting that, which goes back to even about like your About Us page or your Our Story and how that's structured, how do people easily find you from a brand perspective. But I think like there's two different worlds there. And then I think what we're all learning too is that, as Jon mentioned, like how the pages are crawled is then going to who actually owns the technical side of your website and getting them bought in on like, okay, here's the stuff that needs to change for us to be like, when you're asked like, why isn't it seeing up? Like, we're not gonna be able to do that ourselves. We have to get the product engineering teams like on board that this is worth putting in a sprint and being like, oh no, we're gonna see the returns from that. So I think that's kind of like the other side of like the getting buy-in too.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay. So now we're going to go to the more technical revenue terms. So John, I'll come back to you about the sequels and the lead and all the fun terms. But Jeannie, there was something that we talked about when you're presenting, like, hey, here's the impact that the content's having, and it's not always clear, right? You brought up this concept of blended CAC. Mm-hmm. Can you please explain, define for all of us? Because that's like the millionaire term.
Sure. So I will caveat that, like, I don't actually use blended CAC a ton in my own, like, sort of arguing ROI, because again, I have like a really clear straight line from a lot of my content to revenue or potential revenue. So blended CAC, what that means for folks who don't know, CAC stands for customer acquisition cost. And it's usually used in the paid acquisition world. So like you spend, X $1 million on, you spend $1 million on Facebook and you acquire 1,000 customers. Like, God, I have to do math in public now. And so you've got like your CAC is $1,000, right? I think I did that right. And so that's usually that's used like on paid channels, and you measure it like by channel and things like that. Your blended CAC is all of your customer acquisition costs divided by all of your customers that you've acquired, including ones that you've acquired organically, which are free, right? They're not free because you've got the cost of like your teams and things like that. So when you add all of these free customers to that pot, it brings the overall blended CAC down. And given that paid acquisition costs, as the helpful chart that Noah showed, only continue to go up, the prospect of bringing your blended CAC down is usually extremely attractive to C-suites and everybody involved, right? Because you want to everybody's trying to get more customers at a lower cost. And because those paid costs are going up, the only way to do that is to have more organic acquisition.
Jon, so in addition to that, let's talk about MQLs. MQLs. Define and then talk about how that connects to acquisition cost.
Yeah. Acquisition cost would be normally leads, but you could do cost per MQL. Mm-hmm. So with that, I am thinking through essentially first touch and last touch for attribution. I want to see both, and I actually want to see like W, if you've ever seen that. Mm-hmm. So I think the story half the time is organic is the first touch. So which traditionally remarketing can actually get it to the MQLs or the lead stage. Mm-hmm. So which then hopefully you're bringing in the right people. With remarketing, you can actually make sure you're targeting the right people. So in theory, you could actually be increasing efficiency in your paid channels through organic. For MQLs though, traditionally you have account-based scoring or scoring system essentially, where based on these attributes, like this is what it takes to reach MQL. So traditionally, some people might say a demo from this job title or something like that, or company size. So making sure you're targeting the right people is probably pretty important.
And MQL is a marketing qualified lead.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
And an SQL is a sales qualified.
Yeah.
So marketing qualified usually is further up the funnel, and a sales qualified lead is further.
Yeah, I'm so used to hearing it all the time. Yeah. That's where not all leads are equal. So if you bring in a ton of bad leads, and I do have a story with that from Google Ads, like you shouldn't trust everything coming from Google Ads. Essentially, at a coffee shop out of Thailand, we actually narrowed down the IP address that was bringing in like 500 leads at full story.
Oh dear.
And we blocked the IP and everything coming out of it.
Good call.
So clearly none of those were turning into MQLs. And we were like, this is making our spend much less efficient. Yeah. So for organic, there's the same kind of thing. You create some bad content that might be targeting students. It's going to potentially bring in some really bad leads and actually make the cost per MQL, well, if you consider the cost per team, cost per your budget, much higher.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Jeannie, anything to add there?
No,
Charlotte, Jeannie
explained it pretty well. But yeah, I mean, I think that's another piece of it too, that like a marketing qualified lead is usually just somebody who comes to your site and like clicks or like fills out a form or something like that. And a sales qualified lead is usually further down depending on the complexity of your business. It might be somebody who actually like fills out an application or has a call with the sales team or things like that. And so you might find that you're bringing in a lot of MQLs, but they're all falling out further down the funnel where to get to SQL. So it is actually, so if you are able to, it's great to be able to look at multiple stages so that you can see where things might be breaking down.
And that's probably the most important thing you can do, because if an article might be ranking in like second position and it's bringing in the most SQLs, it tells me right away I should be focusing on getting that into first position and the prompts that are likely grounded from that keyword. So there are things like that that I definitely think about.
Sure. Erin, so Jon hit on another thing, prompting, which I know is huge for you. How do you determine what prompts to track?
Yeah, so I actually kind of, and this is kind of a platform. I didn't come up with this on my own, by the way. So somebody had to share it with me. And I was like, wow, that's kind of genius. Because I asked, someone, one of the experts like we hired to help us out. And I was like, well, tracking prompts, which by the way are separate, for ones I track are separate from the ones we track as a brand. Like our marketing manager who kind of manages like our overall visibility strategy, she's tracking terms like, digital banks and such like that how we rank for. So I actually have a whole separate platform. So we don't combine them two together because my prompts otherwise will completely destroy her tracking, where it's like, oh, why it's going down? Like, actually it's not. We're just tracking different things. So like that's actually important, is like make sure if you're tracking your content, it's separate from your overall brand in terms that you're looking for. But so I kind of take like a story I have. I'm like, I literally just ask the platforms themselves, throw the story in there, like the copy, and be like, what would lead to this being cited? And I give it specific instructions. So I actually have a little project in Claude, and I've kind of taught it, and I call it prompts. And it's that would be fancy. But and I gave it instructions. I was like, this isn't about current. It's not about banking. This is about people searching for the topic, right? Like we're trying to reach people who could potentially be customers of current, talking about things that are money conscious, saving topics. They're searching for these topics anyway, something we've talked about that we could potentially come up as a solution, and they become aware of us, right? And then, ideally then they visit our website, then they're retargeted with ads and such like that. So it's as simple as asking the platform themselves, and you have to kind of be careful because you're usually charged per like how many credits and stuff for platforms that you're charging. So I wouldn't recommend having like 20, but maybe about 10 I found is about usually the sweet spot. And kind of seeing, is one just taking off? And maybe I don't need all the others and I turn them off because I'm like, well, every time they're run, like we're being charged data costs, right? So the ones that aren't bringing them up, I'll go in and turn them off. But just like, going to the source and asking yourself, be like, what would make you cite this article, Claude? Like, tell me.
And then taking that and putting it into your content. Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, I will say that like when I set up our AI visibility tracking at first, I used the platform we were tracking in to like just help me set it up. And then it's about 6 months later now, I actually just asked Claude to audit, like, based on the context that it has from me using Claude too much, like asked it to audit like all the prompts we were tracking. And it gave me like great solutions and revised the whole thing for me. So
very efficient, effective.
Yeah, very similar approach. Like I said, I look at the pages that are bringing in the most leads, look at the keywords that are driving traffic to those pages, and then you can use Claude to break down what your persona is likely searching based on that keyword or that page. Essentially, we'll call them money prompts. We're going from money keywords to money prompts. So trying to figure those out is probably one of the more important things because it's probably what's going to drive in traffic and leads at the end of the day. Prompts like, what are the benefits of expense management, for example, are likely not to generate anything, but they might see your brand. So it might be good for like brand visibility a tiny bit. So, but yeah, I would use Claude, and you could use the suggestions, but really think about those. Because in most cases, if everything is very similar, well, it's going to look great when in reality, you're probably not doing that well.
I'll add really quickly, Aleda Solis, who's a SEO like influencer. She just published this like big comprehensive guide to like how to figure out your prompts. I haven't read it yet. It's open in a tab on my laptop, but I plan to dig into that though.
Awesome. Okay. So last thing, we've talked a lot about what metrics and reporting and the mindset and the approach that we should have, what are things that you think that in our industry we're probably obsessing over but they're not helpful? Like what should we not be doing?
For SEO, I'll just say total organic traffic, and I just brought it up before. What if you're just bringing in a bunch of spam? I'd also like to break it down by branded and non-branded. So I want to figure out how to increase non-branded at the end of the day. Love to increase branded. There's a lot of teams that are working on increasing that at the same time, but probably that right now. And at the end of the day, in the next year, I think someone brought it up before, we are likely to see less clicks. And what if Google moves from just the normal search engine to AI mode? Overnight, we will see that drop.
Yeah, I would second that. I think traffic is the thing that we should actually not care that much about, except as it leads to leads and other things. And I would say that, you know, when I've been in situations where we publish like a lot of data reports or a lot of things that are designed to generate backlinks and citations and things like that, some of the most, what I would call the most successful pieces of traffic there maybe didn't get, or some of the most successful pieces of content didn't necessarily get that much traffic, but they were just being cited a ton by like very high authority press and other outlets. And that is a win in my book.
I'd say I'll go back to what I said earlier, stop reporting on impressions. Like that BS metric. I'm like, if I never saw that again as a comms person, that would make me so happy. Or even like I'd say more if it's like you're looking at like social media and it's like X impressions, maybe. I'd say like that. I still think engagements are a better instance. But I'll say like that, stop reporting on impressions and move to citations with actual proof that someone saw your story. And I'd kind of fall in that. And also something I said earlier is like, stop asking all of your content to do the same thing.
Yeah.
But, you know, it kind of goes back to the conversation I had about like when I worked at Priceline, was like everything was about, you know, ROI and like revenue. And, you know, it ultimately comes back to that at some point in the day. But if that's the only thing you're focused on, you might not see like the results you're going to. And it doesn't mean you're not telling good stories. So I think like keep trying to find like the metrics that work for the stories you're trying to tell.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And thank you all. Thank you.